All right. Well, I think that's all our nearly all our panelists in the room, and I think we can make a start. So I just wanted to thank everybody for being here this afternoon in what I hope will be a lively and informed discussion. This will be the 21st panel of the 2021 Alternative Mining Indaba, hosted by DCC Africa and by Wits Mining Institute. We're very grateful to those of you joining this discussion live and in the room, and of course to anybody watching this on the stream following the conference. Our panelists today are drawn from a wide range of backgrounds, and each plays an intrinsic role within the public policy, regulatory, investment, and on-the-ground activity affecting the mining sector. But each also brings informed views on the topic at the heart of today's discussion, artisanal and small-scale mining. The International Institute for Sustainable Development estimates that artisanal and small-scale mining provides jobs to more than 13 million people in 80 countries around the world. And while those sorts of numbers may sound similar to those of large-scale mining, it's there that the resemblance ends. Small-scale miners are often forced to work in unstable, dangerous environments without proper tools and with minimal health or safety considerations. And in the absence of a formal offtake process in most instances, artisanal miners have little guarantee of a route to market and no guarantee of a fair price. Efforts to improve traceability, price transparency, sustainability, and safety in the mining sector too frequently overlook the importance of artisanal practices, and in doing so, limit the possibility of effecting genuine change where it's needed most. And it's that change and the practical steps required to achieve it that our panel will be discussing today. So, let me introduce our panelists and then tell you a little bit about how this session is going to be structured. We are joined first by Dr. Janet Munakamwe from Wits University Mining Institute, where she is currently a visiting lecturer, researching and teaching on labor issues in the mining space. Janet works closely with mining affected communities in South Africa and across the African continent, and has previously published on the link between the formal and informal economy in gold mining. Leslie Cairns joins us from DCC Africa, where he is head of investment. Leslie has more than 30 years experience in building, promoting, and restructuring companies worldwide. The mining sector is particularly close to his heart, and he has been physically involved with the development and operations of drift mine, open cast extraction, and reclamation of coal, chrome, gold, and other minerals, particularly in Africa and the United Kingdom. Last year, Leslie was appointed head of investment at DCC Africa, and based on his experience, DCC Africa is developing a new program which enables artisanal and small-scale mining companies, initially in Tanzania, to meet the challenges that they face. We're joined by Sandile Nombeni, who is co-founder and organizer of the 360 Degrees Environmental Organization, which is a group based in South Africa that looks at the environmental challenges that affect the environmental sustainability of mining affected communities. And we hope to be joined in time by Dr. Yassir Dafala, who is a specialist in mining economics with a PhD in African economics. In addition to Dr. Yassir's 20 years in business, environment, and trade, he also spent 5 years appointed to the role of General Secretary for Planning, Research, and Mineral Economics at the Ministry of Minerals in the government of Sudan. And he is now actively involved in trade promotion around Sudan's underdeveloped mining sector. So, as you can see, our panelists represent not only different aspects of the mining value chain, but also different parts of the world. So I would first like each of our panelists to provide a personal perspective, introducing themselves and their areas of interest with small-scale mining, and for each of them to begin by offering a response to the same question. After our panel has spoken, I will lead a series of questions and invite panelists to respond not only to these questions, but to the answers given by others. So, if we're ready to begin, I'd like to start with Dr. Janet and ask you, once you've introduced yourself, Dr. Janet, how you think we should define enfranchisement when we think about small-scale mining activities and small-scale miners. So over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jerome, for your kind introductory remarks, and also for respecting the ladies first principle. If it's not gonna push me to the edge. Yeah, thank you so much. So basically, like Jerome has indicated, I've been working with mining affected communities, but also I've a special academic interest in the aspect of the ASM sector, which is one of the key strategic programs there at the Wits Mining Institute. And I've worked with quite a number of communities in relation to this. So just to quickly respond to the question of what what we understand by this enfranchisement. I guess it will go back to my historical academic work on this particular area, where we basically, when we talk of enfranchisement, we're talking of the right and privilege that are actually granted to individuals. And in this case, working with communities in South Africa, where mining, small-scale mining of precious minerals, let me just make a distinction because there is that aspect that is permitted within the laws. As long as you're mining sand, there's no problem. So basically, for those who are operating in small-scale miners or artisanal miners in those particular sectors that generate special minerals like gold, diamond, the practitioners, those who are actually involved in those activities are actually criminalized. And so they don't have that right to mine in those particular spaces. They do not have the privileges that are actually available for industrial big mining corporates. So basically here we're trying to look at ways to ensure that, to ensure parity, as this particular AMI session is also more interested in addressing those inequalities. So we need first to do away with the barriers that make it impossible for ordinary women and men to benefit out of the natural resource minerals that are available, that are at their disposal on their land. I think that's what cuts across the theme of the AMI: access to land and, of course, the mineral resources as the indigenous peoples of Africa, where we know that the continent is endowed with a lot of resources. So yeah, basically that's the understanding. So we're pushing, and I think there's some very formidable movement here in South Africa that's trying to push for decriminalization of the Zamazama. And in fact, we call them Zamazama. Let me not call them by their names, so that at least when they begin to benefit from their privileges, people won't get confused as to who exactly are the privileges targeting. So it's Zamazamas in the context of South Africa. I understand in Zimbabwe, they are called Makorokoza. Then Ghana, Galamsey, and there are so many names that are attached to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Dr. Janet. Very, very interesting. I think we'll come back to the question of approach versus a country-by-country approach. But having touched on Ghana and Zimbabwe, perhaps I could move over to Leslie to give us a sense of your experience currently working in Tanzania, to give us an introduction to your work, and of course then to return to that first question, how do you think we should define enfranchisement when we think about small-scale mining activities. So Leslie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jerome, for your introduction, and thank you all for inviting me today. Tanzania is a country where I've been working now for 2 years. My colleagues have been on the ground for 12 years, and they invited me to look at the situation there because of my background in small-scale and medium-scale mining. I also know about corporate mining across the world and with some of the big corporates in South Africa and Canada. I see the enfranchisement as the ability for the individual miner to, first of all, become a legal operator. Secondly, to understand the responsibilities that come with that, and to enable that, to provide him with finance, equipment, and advice. Any small business starting wherever it is in the world, in whatever sector, needs those things in order that they can stand up and be counted and compete fairly with others, because competition is obviously always there and always will be. I feel that the corporates have not done anything like as much as they should have done to help, but neither do I feel they're ever going to really help. So I think that the individual miner needs support, and in the ways I just described. And my vision is to create that situation, first of all in Tanzania, but in other countries in Africa, and also to assist in South Africa. We have our own public representation in South Africa, so we have pretty close contacts with them, and we would be very anxious to bring our concept to those in South Africa as well as to the rest of the Africa. I worked in Senegal, I worked in Zambia, and to some degree in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so the situation is the same in every country you find it. The underprivileged remain underprivileged, and that is not the way the world should be. And my objective is to change that in whatever way I can.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that brief introduction, Leslie. Again, I think we'll come back to the topic of the relative strengths of the public and private sector in meeting these challenges. But for now, let's pass over to Sandile. Sandile, perhaps you could give us an introduction to some of the work that you're leading in the Gauteng area with ASM communities, to give us an introduction of your work at 360, and again, to return to that question of what you think enfranchisement means when we talk about small-scale miners. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks to the previous speakers. My name is Sandile Nombeni from 360 Degrees Environmental Organization, which is based in Gauteng, South Africa, in the city of Ekurhuleni in Kwatema Township. And what 360 is looking at is a very small community-based organization, especially on the issue of artisanal miners, and also combined with the issue of the environmental sustainability within mining affected communities and host communities also, is the fact that when you look at South Africa as a country and Africa as a whole, maybe let me include Africa, we're seeing that most mine host communities are the ones who are usually affected. And as I'm saying this, just yesterday, I got a message from one of the networks I'm working with, where there was a notice of, we just been notice of a young abandoned shaft from, I think it's something like a brake manufacturing company that used to mine around the Val area, where this 15-year-old boy was playing with his friend, then he was swallowed by one of the swamps which have been left there, and no one knows how long or how big that water swamp is. And that gives us some worries in terms of the environmental sustainability we're living under as mine host communities. And at the same time, looking at the mine shafts that are left lying around within our communities, and also highlighting this actually for there's also another Jerusalem, Germiston, who fell into a mine shaft around 4 years back, around this month on the 25th. So like you understand that partly part of the impacts of what is happening as the mining legacy for the South African environment. And at the same time, we're also looking at sometime last week, I think it was on Friday, on the South African news on SABC1, there's families of ex-employees of Lily Mine in Mpumalanga who also fell into a shaft with a huge container while they were at work. And all these people I'm talking about, besides the one which was posted yesterday, they all sank into the shaft and their bodies were never resumed. And they all more than 2 years, of which the South African government, even if they're saying they're trying, it doesn't seem like it. So like these are situations which are concurrently happening within the South African context of mining and the mining legacy. And also there's been several incidents of the South African like the Zamazama works, where you'd find that some Zamazamas have been trapped underground for some days. And looking at that, when we speak about franchising, for me, the context speaks to, especially in the South African way, it speaks to, these are some of the things that also needs to be taken into account. Because one, most of these companies that are doing mining in our communities, they're usually doing mining in poor areas, where it's rural areas. Usually people do not have access to water, people do not have access to swimming pools, people do not have access to jobs. And this is partly an alternative in terms of creating a sustainable livelihood for them. And for Zamazamas, in most cases in South Africa, you find that the illegal immigrants from Zimbabwe, from Lesotho, from the other parts of South African sub-regions. And when you look at this in South Africa, partly in the work I've been doing, it's like it has grown in such a manner that even South Africans have taken part in terms of getting into the space of doing artisanal mining. In the sense that when you look at now, we look at the impact of COVID-19 with artisanal mining. There are so many people who have lost their jobs, especially in the mining sector. And we look at our governments internationally have failed to cater or to push the mining companies to create alternative skills for miners within their own industries, that they are able for them to be able to look at other alternative jobs that they can create or they can participate in terms of contributing towards the work of artisanal mining, besides artisanal mining. But then at the same time, when you look at the history of Africa, we've been slaves for quite a long time. I think even for now, in my own perspective, we're still slaves in such a way that even today, as Africans, we do not have the rights to be the one who are producers of our own minerals. We do not have the rights to be the custodians of our own minerals and to be the ones who work their own minerals, for us to be able to create our own independent economies. So for me, the issue of franchising artisanal mining and small-scale mining, it's like in a global perspective, it's still like underlooked in such a sense that there are certain people or there are certain categories of people that need for one to be able to be like, or to create a sustainable environment or create a sustainable livelihood within the spectrum of artisanal and small-scale mining. Thank you.
No, thank you, Sandile. There's some very, very important points that you've raised there. And I'd certainly like to come back to you on the topic of safety and the topic of, I think, stewardship would be very, very important to look at later on in the discussion. I believe we have Dr. Yassir on the line now from Sudan. Dr. Yassir, if you can hear us, please could you give a short introduction to some of your work in the mining space, and also to look at that question around how you define enfranchisement when we think about small-scale mining in Sudan. Hello, Dr. Yassir, are you on the line? Okay, perhaps we'll come back to Dr. Yassir when he's joining us. But I think some very, very interesting points have been raised just in the introductions that we've heard so far. But I want to start by going back to a point that Dr. Janet made, looking at the different activities across Zimbabwe, across South Africa, looking at Ghana, and of course Leslie's contribution from Tanzania. It would be a mistake to think that there is one solution to all of these ideas. It would be a mistake to think we can just come up with one size fits all idea to these practical steps towards enfranchisement. But having recognized that the advancement and the reality of the mining sector differs so greatly between countries, between minerals, between processes, Dr. Janet, how do you think we can embrace the absence of a single solution, but still make sure that we're all pulling in the same direction towards a positive change? Hello, Dr. Janet, are you hearing us okay? Perhaps we can come back to that then. Maybe Leslie, I could start with you then on a
of course,
separate.
yes.
I think we have Dr. Janet. Can you hear us okay? Okay, we'll come back to Dr. Janet in just a second. Leslie.
Sorry, I had muted. Sorry, I'm trying to. Okay.
It's no problem at all. Dr. Janet, I was just asking about how we have this difference between every mineral, every country needs a different approach in franchisement. But how do we start this conversation with a degree of consistency towards positive change? What's your view on that?
Oh, thank you so much for that question, Jerome. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to navigate through my phone and my laptop. So yeah, I guess the good starting point, I think the alternative mining in Indaba, for me, it's a good point of departure. What do I mean? I think the platform brings together people from different communities, diverse communities, let me say, with diverse needs, nuanced approaches to issues, and most fundamentally, we'll be having in the room every time two conflicting sides: those who believe in mining for the purposes of advancing livelihoods, economic livelihoods. Then those who will be anti-mining, and they're clear. Those who say no to mining, like I know my comrade Sandile, he has said it, or I'm sure he has already summarized his position. Those who are like, care more about the ecological aspect of it, right? So only that gives us two categories. But at the same time, now when we get to those who actually advocating for mining, of which I think constitute much of the discussion here, how do we then make improvements in such? Those who actually calling for formalization of artisanal small-scale mining, they have different needs. Of course, we understand, like in the case of Zimbabwe, it's actually liberal from a political perspective. The political climate there allows anybody to just go in and dig and do whatever they want to do. The laws are quite silent as to how best they can actually address that particular problem, because there's that acknowledgement that there is need for you know, people to earn a livelihood. There are no jobs anyway. That's a reality. For political gains, we find different particular countries having different nationalistic responses based on their realities, and that's a clear fact that the divisions and the nuances are quite prominent, and they're very clear. Then there's aspects around how then do we perhaps ensure that within all our diversity, we still pursue and have the same kind of, you know, solidarities, let me say, from a civic society perspective. It's all about having that solidarity, consolidating the views of those who are anti and who are pro, but bearing in mind that at the end of the day, whatever those other groups believe in, we don't actually, let me say, infringe on the rights of those who are pro and who are anti-one. Then I guess also the army has been calling for many years. I've had the privilege to reflect on almost all the declarations that have been passed on for the last 12 years. It's very clear that the army has been agitating, I mean, the MI, the Alternative Mining Indaba, has been agitating for policy and legislative reforms, but from a regional perspective, I guess we might not have blanket laws, but at least if we have some kind of one continental law that speaks to perhaps issues of how we, or policies, how to ensure that we embrace those within the informal economy of mining into the formal economy. I think this is a broad debate, not only specific to mining, but it actually cuts across many sectors, I mean, economic and labor sectors. So for me, a regional approach to this particular issue is what is critical. If we are to get our message clear and right, and also to ensure that we strike a balance between all the diverse and, you know, at times conflicting views.
Yeah,
I know it's very difficult, but it's a very difficult question.
Sure, there's no easy answers on today's panel, I'm afraid. But
yeah, sure, no, yeah.
But thank you very much. I think well, we'll come back to the idea of the regional approach, but I just wanted to go back to an idea really about terminology here, because even in the 20 minutes or so that we've been speaking, we've heard about small-scale miners, we've heard about artisanal miners, informal miners. Where do we think, Leslie, do you think there's a helpful distinction to be made still between artisanal miners and small-scale miners? And where do you think that that distinction or definition sort of leaves perceptions around, particularly around sort of the legal aspects of mining activities?
Well, let me go back to the point that Janet was making, and that in different countries there are different approaches to the situation, and indeed, of course, there are different factions, some who support mining and some who don't. But go back to Sandile's point that the assets that are under the ground in Africa belong to all the people, and they should all be benefiting from them. And to date in history, that hasn't been the case, and that needs to change. The approach to enabling that is different. In Senegal, for argument's sake, about 10 years ago, they divided the whole country up into a patchwork of pieces of land and gave each piece of land to the people that lived on it. So each tribe and each village had ownership of that land, and they owned the minerals underneath. that land. And the problem was, of course, they didn't have any money to develop that. So I was asked to go and meet people around all of Senegal and bring a common view to the situation by negotiating with the heads of the village and the local mining inspectorate to enable them to move forward. And so that everybody in the village got benefit from what was happening, each playing their own part. We, as a supplier of equipment with the knowledge of how to mine in their particular area in a safe manner, played that part. And yet you go to Tanzania, and there the government own all the land, and they just invite people to make application, and anyone can get an application. Anyone can get the rights to work on a piece of land, but then, having got the rights, they then don't have the wherewithal to actually proceed with any mining or investigation what's underneath it. Because in Tanzania, they insist on having a proper plan for safety and operations within that land that you have got license to mine on. So it needs support right across the board. And I think this comes from governance. When we talk about ESG, excuse me, I'll just get rid of this. When we talk about ESG, it takes governance from those who want to be enfranchised. They need to be together and stand together and have help to do that. And that's where I think that is the way forward for this. And our policy is to meet with people who are presently possibly mining illegally and give them advice how to change that. One of the things we're planning on doing is acquiring mining licenses and then sharing it up between them. So we acquire the licenses from the government or whatever entity there is within the present strictures of government, so that we're moving forward. We're not actually at war with the existing situation, but we get the rights for the benefit of those who work there, so that they then are legal. And then with the legality comes the support to ensure safety and good practice. And with that, we can then put in place financial support, training, so that people become able to run their own business and feel a sense of pride in doing that, which they're fully entitled to. Africa belongs to people just as England belongs to England and all the other countries in the world. And I think that that is the objective. And I could go on an awful lot of points, but basically, our view is that there needs to be structure to this, and to bring the structure, there needs to be help and appreciation of where people are and where they should be. And that's, I think, is the way forward. And it needs all of us to join together in that, appreciating the different views, the different experiences. And particularly when you hear what Sandile was talking about, is appalling that companies have just walked away and left great holes in the ground. As in the UK, they've left great piles of coal. When the rain has come down, and 20 years ago, it came down, and then millions of tons just went over a whole village, and everybody was dead in 1 hour. So these are the things that are still there on the ground, and so a proper analysis of the land on which is to be mined, if it is going to be mined. And if it isn't going to be mined, then it needs properly reinstating. And we have worked 20 odd years ago, we worked in the UK, removing these great piles of what we call slag, which is the piles of rubbish that was not processed when mining was done years ago, and making sure there's no more coal left in it, so it's pure inert material, and reinstating the land so it's safe, and then making it into farming land again. So these are the things that need to be done, and there isn't just one way of doing it, but there is a broad approach that can work in that way. And I think whatever it is to promote farming or to promote mining, it starts by enabling people to be on the same in the same position, and there to be a level playing field with everybody, be it big corporate business or be it the man on his own or small business, whatever it is, but it all needs support. And I think there is room for everything to move forward in that context. And I think we all have a part to play in bringing that together.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I'd like to bring in Sandile just to talk on.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to just chip in and jump in support of what Leslie has just said, but also to overemphasize the fact that it's disingenuous for African countries to go out there, calling for investors to come and invest in the mining sector, yet they understand very well the dynamics that are at play. So certainly, we really would appreciate and some interventions in terms of, police intervention, because I understand some governments actually claim that they don't have that technical expertise. It actually came up on Tuesday with our during an engagement with the parliamentarian in one of the sessions, that there's no technical expertise at times to support policymakers, which is also somehow the case. I don't know, I stand for correction, Comrade Sandile. Part of the reason why, even up to now, the Department of Minerals in South Africa is still reluctant is still ambivalent as to how they should move around this, address this aspect of zamazamas. Let me just call them zamazamas so that I don't conflict between the different divides according to the mineral that is mined. So basically, they called for communities like the ones where Comrade Sandile comes from, Kwatema, they specialize on gold. Then there was some research that was supported by Oxfam, South Africa, in which the government asked communities and even all those well-wishers who can come on board to provide some technical research into how we could come up with a regulatory framework to guide, how we should engage with zamazamas, or how we could actually, how they could be factored into the entire mining extractive economy in South Africa in a very formal way. So honestly, technical support would actually assist. It's one of the key interventions that I believe we need to take head on. And also, I just want to emphasize the fact that we can't really decriminalization before investment. We can't talk about, it goes back to the fact that we can't talk about people coming to invest their resources in a criminalized environment. And this would actually, in a way, encourage what we're trying to fight even today, that is the illicit financial flows that are very pervasive in this particular sector. So I'll just leave it there. I just wanted to just touch on and build up from some of the comments that Leslie has proffered here. Thank you so much.
If I could just make one additional comment on that point. My experience has been that there are many heads of government departments in Africa who are shy and unwilling to go forward. They don't have the necessary technical knowledge to deal with the matter they're supposed to be dealing with. And that is the case not just in mining, but that is the case in banking. And so that a lot of indigenous banks in Africa are unable to communicate, and the governments are unable to communicate in a commercial and an acceptable manner with the rest of the world, because They don't have the management ability or training to do that. And that is a very good point.
Thank you, Leslie, and to Dr. Janet as well. I'm keen to bring Sandile onto the line for this conversation. I think some of the points you raised about the safety and the conditions in which small-scale miners are working, we can't rely on the news to talk about these things. We can't rely on other people taking an interest. There has to be an active dialogue, and I think particularly when it comes to regulation or anything coming from the public sector, that needs to be informed by the experiences and the concerns of people on the ground. So looking at South Africa, it is one of, if not the most advanced environment for mining across the African continent, and with a large public sector and a great deal of energy devoted towards creating a strong regulatory framework. From your experience, how well do you think the today's concerns from the communities you work with are being reflected in the regulatory environment in South Africa? Do you think it's being well served or not at the moment?
Okay. Jerome, what I'll do, I think, because some of the issues I wanted to raise, they've already been raised by Comrade Janet and Comrade Leslie, but then I'll also go back with my own perspective on them, where I've only indicated like 4 items which I wanted to present this around, which is one, the structure of the ASM franchising. The second one, which is going to be the safety environmental sustainability of the ASM. And thirdly, being the economically community beneficiation systems, which needs to be taken into place. Then the last one would be the inclusive policy development forums and platforms. And of which, coming to the first one, when we speak about the ASM, in most of the areas where we go and engage with artisanal miners, we find that they do have their own structures in terms of when you go into site, when you're gonna begin working in a site. They already find people that are there, and you'd have to communicate with them in terms of, guys, I'm also wanting to be part of this. I want to do this, though I'll be working on my own, but then they're the ones who are gonna tell you, because already you do not want to infringe of people's spaces, because they've already allocated themselves some spaces where they are working. So for you to create your own workstation, you need to communicate with them, which shows that already there are structures of communication with the artisanal miners themselves, and of which in most cases you find that when you go and pay visits to them, most government officials, they do not just go and visit them or make appointments with them or become friendly with their spaces and with the people residing in those sites or working in those sites. But what the South African government does when it says it wants to create or formalize artisanal miners, which also covers, this also would cover the issue of the inclusivity, like the inclusive policy development forums, and also the issue of structuring. Because with this comes with, when you visit these sites, you'd find that more, especially the artisanal miners, Zamas, they're usually having challenges. From you understand that as an unemployed person, you actually doing artisanal mining for the sake of generating income to feed you and your family, in order for your family to have a sustainable livelihood. But then with the challenge of mobilizing resources for you, especially working tools, you'd find that usually the government is sending police over the site to come and decriminalize you, in a sense that what they do, they'd come to your site, they'll take your working equipment, which is one of you spend money, sometimes which is the working tools. The police would come, they would selling for you to make an income, and which is also part of secondly, under the structural movement, speaking up the ones who are
I think, Sandile, we lost you for a moment there. Could you go, I think you're on mute at the moment.
Yeah, no, I'm back. I'm not sure what happened.
No problem.
Yeah. So when you look at the guys who are doing surface mining in South Africa, because in South Africa we have two types of artisanal mining, which is one, the surface mining and the underground mining. So when you look at the surface mining, what the techniques that the guys are using in the surface mining, they are very simple techniques of which our government, it's easy to fund, it's easy to it's easy to like look at those techniques and work more in terms of developing those techniques in order for those techniques to be user friendly for the people who are doing artisanal mining. And the second issue, which is the issue of safety of the environment, and also including the work they do, because most Zamazamas are using mercury in South Africa to do their artisanal mining. When we're speaking of the gold artisanal mining sector, they're usually using mercury for processing their gold. So our government needs to sit down needs to consult the guys, and we need to do more research in terms of what is an alternative that they can use rather than using mercury. Because one of the major challenges with mercury and Zamazamas is that it's very difficult for them to access mercury. And at the same time, mercury is very dangerous for one person to handle. And the third point with mercury is that mercury is not safe with the environment at the same time. So what we need to do in the South African, like as the broad community with the South African government in terms of the building the franchise for the ASM, is we need to create a space where there is open and clear engagement between the government, the mining companies, and the broad community members. Because I think Janet spoke about a platform where the government wanted the community, the civil society, and the communities to come on board in terms of doing or developing a strategy of how we can franchise or formalize artisanal mining in South Africa. But within these spaces, what we'd find is that you'll never find any artisanal miners being present at the tables of the discussions. You'd never find people who are working closely with artisanal miners. And part of the engagements that are taking place, it's the discussions are being led on a perspective of a hearsay and also a perspective of assuming, meaning like you can't assume what I need as a person, but you need to come and ask me in terms of what do I need. So for us to be able to get into an engagement that would lead us to a policy development framework that would make a sustainable artisanal mining sector in South Africa, it's for all sectors to be participating, fairly participating in the policy discussions, and also looking at the aspects of the structuring of ASM, the safety and environmental sustainability, and also the economic side of the sector. Because what we find, as much as we do not have rights as most African citizens for the minerals, we are the ones at the end of the day who are supposed to be custodians of these minerals. But then you'd find that for one to be able to become a jeweler, I need to go and apply with a very high amount of money that I do not have. So which gives also limitations in terms of how artisanal mining can be beneficial within the communities.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Thank you.
Very, very important. And I'd like to bring Dr. Janet just in on one of these points here. I think the illicit, the legality, this seems to be something that we keep coming back to and tripping over. And given that this is a panel on the practical steps towards enfranchisement. Dr. Janet, I'd like to ask, given the existing legislative framework in South Africa, what do you think the most positive step towards decriminalizing informal mining activities could be? What is that first step towards taking the sting of criminality out of this conversation that you would like to see?
Thank you so much, and many thanks to Leslie and Sandile. Comrade Sandile, you know it very well, that whenever these policymakers, they meet, you are the menu. So obviously, I've heard it several times actually coming up throughout the session, the aspect about communities being the menu, and, you know, on the table, but they are not actually physically invited. This is something that is very critical. And it actually somehow touches into part of the positive steps that you're talking about, Jerome. The first step for me is to recognize the significant, the fundamental role of artisanal mining in contributing towards the economic growth, job creation in any particular country. So the fact that Zamazamas are discussed on the table as a menu, and they're not part and parcel of the agenda, because honestly, if you are legal, if you are regarded as a criminal, would you even go? Would you find the extended invite to you as genuine or sincere? Obviously, Comrade Sandile has spoken about the issues of police. You'd think perhaps they've invited us so that they can nab us to say, oh, we have to start with the leadership. So the first step is to recognize artisanal mining as a key livelihood activity that is sustaining poor households, the majority of which are Black African households that are actually poor. We shouldn't forget that time and again, let me say, African governments right now, if it were the conventional times that the alternative mining Indaba meets in Cape Town, they'll be actually talking about coming to invest. They're calling upon all the international investors to come into the country to invest. But at the same time, they don't want to recognize these particular small players who could actually feed into the entire broader, commodity chain. Because obviously we can talk about all these other issues like, hey, today you are mining, you are illegal, but where's the destination of this particular gold? Let's actually try and locate the commodity value chain of the illegally mined gold. Where do we find it at international level? At international markets. So for me, it's a matter of recognizing first the players who are the small scale miners and provide the necessary material support, which I understand Leslie has actually touched on earlier, as to we certainly need to support these players. So instead of supporting them, we find the opposite taking place in our African countries. That is, you criminalize them in such a way that they are not free to sell their gold. They are not free to report any cases that relate to health and safety. Mind you, them being criminalized doesn't simply mean that their lives are so cheap. Their lives are equally the same as those who go underground in the formal mines. So health and safety issues come to the fore. And we can only achieve that if we recognize these people as these players, the Zamazamas, as workers, as normal small-scale entrepreneurs, you know, as providing the much critical jobs that each and every politician will be talking about. Now we're looking forward to another state of the nation. We know the usual rhetoric. We're gonna create 1 million jobs. Where are they gonna come from if we don't support the small scale players on the ground who are already keen to undertake some risks going underground without anyone forcing them to go underground? And mine, of course, let me actually emphasize this point. I know for those who are anti-Zamazamas would say, no, they cause environmental problems. I know we have had my own debates with Comrade Sandile around it. We are not talking of players who are gonna come up with big machinery and start the prospecting aspect or whatever. We are talking about people who are risking their lives to go underground, abandoned mine shafts that have already been damaged by huge industrial scale mining here. So honestly, it's not a safe environment. But for small scale miners, it's about it's life or death, much as we have experienced under the COVID crisis, whereby communities were saying, if I don't go, it's either I have to still go underground despite all these health protocols. Because if I don't do that, it's either I die from hunger or I die from, you know, the health and safety, whatever the disease itself. So either ways, I'm gonna die. So that recognition is what is fundamental. Then everything else follows. Once this ASM miners are actually recognized, it simply means that if the government goes out there, they have their representatives who understand the dynamics of that particular sector in such a way that they can advise people like Leslie to say, what kind of support should we actually provide to these particular people, as opposed to defining and dictating what these people need, which is outside of their, you know, asks, simply because they are not there. There is that dialogue that has been closed down because of that illegality divide. So let's open up, decriminalize the sector first, then everything follows. Ensure constructive multi-stakeholder involvement in all circles. So it's a whole range of issues, but I was actually touched on Tuesday again when the parliamentary portfolio chairperson of Zimbabwe actually was very clear that if somebody, I wish I had the quotation close by me, I'll look for it. If because I was taking note, if really people are trying to, we know they are aspiring miners, if they wanna be recognized, they should be in a position to pay tax. So the key question is it about the revenue or the tax aspect of it that would allow policy reforms to ensure that these people are enfranchised? Or do we need their tax only? Or we also need to protect them. We need to ensure that the necessary health and safety, material support as possible. That speaks to issues around PPEs, the issues around how the mines are structured, the shafts. Remember, they're abandoned for some reasons. And most importantly, they're abandoned because they failed the health and safety tests. So how then do we ensure that we don't just focus on the criminal aspect of it? But at the end of the day, we know that when the gold is sold at Fidelity, the Fidelity, whatever, the monopolized major market, I mean, in the context of Zimbabwe, and even here, we know very well that the gold is going to be mixed together with that is coming from these Zamazamas, but we don't even care whether the Zamazama who mined it is still alive because of health and safety challenges in the sector. Perhaps we now exporting gold that 25 miners have already died trying to extract the ore underground because of health and safety issues. So for me, those are some of the fundamental issues that I would like to bring to the fore as we continue with the debate. Thanks.
I mean, that I think takes us to a very interesting next topic to look at, which I think is the role that the private sector can play in looking at a new model. And as you say, Dr. Janet, this is a value chain. There are links that need to be looked at. But I can see that Sandile has his hand up, and I'd like to bring him just to respond to some of the points that Dr. Janet just made. Sandile, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Jerome, and also thanks, Janet, for raising this. Part of the major concern I have, it's what Comrade Janet has just alluded to, which is the issue of recognition for mine host communities and the artisanal miners themselves into the policy discussion. And with this, I want to take us to a perspective where, if you remember very well, in the first stages of mining development, especially in South Africa, there's people we now call illegal miners, where actually we're not usually being called illegal mine workers, because most of them, the skill they have, it's a skill of which they learned during the years when they used to be working for mine bosses. And by then they were exploited because they were paid little. They had to pay for their own accommodation, their own food, their own livelihoods. But then with a little amount, and our governments allowed them to come into South Africa, and they allowed them to come into work for these different mining companies, of which they never benefited anyone within the South African communities. But today, because they no longer have the bosses behind their back to pay for their working permits, they are now called illegal, which is one aspect of the discussion. The second issue I've seen two questions on the chat, of which says, do we have an incentive towards artisanal and small-scale miners? Augustine, what I'll tell you, don't listen to what the government is saying. It's a total no. If you can go to the website of the South African Department of Minerals and Energy, looking at the issue of small scale, they don't say anything. They only speak about small scale, of which it means you've got the resources for yourself so that you can start a small mining company. They're not talking about the people who do not have access to the resources, who are doing this, going underground without any safety precautions or safety measures. That's what is there on their document, and that's part of their strategy. There's nothing like that in the South African government policies. And number two, what the second question, which has been brought to my attention, it's the issue of, when we come to the issue of policy development, I've tried to engage with so many artisanal miners in such a point that at one point, I was chosen to be part of a documentary which is called Common Grounds, which speaks to the issue of the different types of where people are using, which people are using to do artisanal mining in South Africa. And with that, we looked at one, the surface mining. We also looked at the underground mining. And in this documentary, we've been doing interviews. And I was part of the people who were going around doing the same interviews, having discussions around the people who are doing the different types of zamazamas, to a point where we ended up reaching the Northern Cape province and Presca, where we find that the guys in that area in the Presca, in the Northern Cape, have eventually developed their own concept in terms of like something like a working policy, which is called the Preschool Protocol. When you look at the Preschool Protocol, it speaks about how the people have been fighting with the government. In a sense, they've been fighting the government in terms of allowing the big corporates to come and mine in a on a mountain, which is partly a communal land. And what they've done as an alternative of the government bringing in big corporations, they started doing their own community mining, where they are mining gems, which are one of their popular products. It's what they call the tiger's eye, which is a very precious gem, which is they are now selling it to India and China and other parts, because the South African government never wanted to incentivize their work. And this comes to the point where this proves that the South African government doesn't have a will to incentivize artisanal mining within the context of this, or with the aim of building artisanal mining to become one of the players in terms of building the South African economy in terms of mining. And I think I once had a discussion with David van Wyk, who's the lead researcher for Benchmarks. At some point within his research, he came across, he was actually got plus minus, I can't remember the actual figures, but what he was initially saying was that South Africa can continue doing mining if you can do mining as community mining, where the artisanal mining is taking into a perspective where mine host communities are the ones who are actually doing it for their own benefit, in order to build the South African economy and their own local economies. But for big corporations, it's no longer viable because of the huge acid mine drainage and the water flows that are increasingly overflowing within the mine shafts, especially within the gold belt, which clearly indicates that our South African government is so ignorant in terms of listening to its own citizens, in terms of what can be done in terms of formalizing the South African artisanal mining sector, because it has been done for so many years. But then if they are saying they're still looking for new ways of doing this and how to regulate this, they are totally talking lies, because there are ways which are being done, which have been practiced for so many years. It's just that they are so ignorant because of I'm sorry, but I'm gonna say, some of the government officials they are within the pockets of the big mining corporations, which is the honest truth. And they're usually benefiting from them. I'll leave it there for now.
Well, thanks very much, Sandile. I think I'd like to bring in Leslie Cairns here, because I think there's an interesting comparison to be made, and perhaps something we can learn from a slightly new model that Leslie is interested in introducing through DCC Africa in Tanzania. Dr. Janet spoke about the value chain, and I think it would be a mistake to look at one end of that without thinking about the other. And I think, Leslie, I'd like to bring you in just to put forward perhaps some thought on a more constructive model that the private sector can play as a partner to small-scale miners, and to Sandile's point, not small-scale miners who are small companies, but genuine individuals seeking to make a life and livelihood. Perhaps you could put some thought forward, both to the support that can be offered in safety, but also looking at that offtake point, how we can ensure that there is a formal, safe, and transparent market supporting miners as well.
My experience has been, first of all, I would say that I always go to the sites where we're discussing mining, and I meet people who shouldn't be there, according to the law. I've met lots of them, and they're all absolutely genuine people. I've never found anyone who is doing anything other than doing his best to earn money to feed his family and keep him with a roof over his head. And I found them to be people who talk sensibly, and they understand what help they need, and they're quite willing to learn and support. Because in order for any organization to work, there has to be government, and with government comes responsibility. So even though you're a small miner and you say, I'm going to start a mining company of my own, you have to be able to understand the rules about safety and how you look after the men that come and work from you and for you. And I found that in all of these places, there are men who are, shall we say, leaders of the other men, but they haven't got the ability or the training to deal with the safety issues. And so what we've done, and we're doing this now up in the gold belt in Tanzania, we're setting up a gold buying center. We're setting up a refinery, and that will start operating next month. And from there, we're going to invite all of the small miners in the area to bring their run of mine, first of all, and then we'll put it through the elution process on their behalf. So it takes away from them all of the issues of dealing with dangerous acids and the related matters, because it's done properly. In return, we will then provide them with the machinery they need on site, not massive machinery, but the ability to put their run of mine into a barrel and break it down, and so that it can be brought for processing. We will also provide them with bank accounts, and we'll provide them with the money so that as soon as their gold is processed, there's their money, and it's all there on record. And what that will do, it will mean that they are no longer operating outside the law as far as the law presently constructed is, whether it's right or wrong. That's the law. But it also gives them safety. We go and help them on site. We establish that the land that they're working on can be theirs, because we're going to go and obtain the licenses from the government for them, so that in due course we create companies so they can become part of the companies, their directors and shareholders. And so that benefits, but all the time we're there helping them. And of course, we're making money, but they're making money too. And we're bringing to the situation, for instance, in this situation in Gita, we're arranging for nurses to come every week so the men can talk to them about their health issues, and they can also bring their families to talk about those issues. And so what we're doing is setting up situations to where they become totally enfranchised in their own right. They're given the legal support to establish their own business and mine in safety, and be assured of a market for their gold. Not as in Tanzania, they have to go and meet people in strange places for cash. It's generally the Indians come along and then they smuggle them out of the country, and there's all sorts of problems going on, which doesn't help Tanzania, doesn't go into the revenue, it doesn't help them to do what they should be doing as a government, because the gold is being really just smuggled out of the country. And the miners, as you rightly point out, they get the lowest possible price without any benefits either. So we're aiming to, we are not aiming to, we are doing that as an example of how things should go. And in that way, we expect that something in the region of 1,000 artisan miners will be coming and supplying our processing plant with their run of mine. So they are taken, and we've all seen them, haven't we, washing the bits of run of mine in acids and then getting involved with mercury. I mean, it's so dangerous, and that needs to be taken away. And I think that's the approach I and my colleagues have taken, because we feel that that's something that can be done now. And it's within the framework of the existing laws. And I think that is the way forward. And that in that way, you will then get change, I think, because once people are grouped together and they're making their own communities and become enfranchised because they become businessmen in their own right, they're independent financially, they're then voters, and of course they can speak. And I think in that way, they will become, all the politicians, I notice when we're doing this, the politicians are suddenly interested because they want them to become the vote for them. And so I think that is the way to persuade the government, but it can be done now if there are sufficient corporations like ours who are interested in doing that. And I hope that we can bring that model and make it, because it certainly works. And we would like to do that in South Africa as well. I mean, just as an indication, you all will know about petra mining and the diamonds side of things and how it got into financial problems. And we tried very hard actually to acquire petra mining with a view that we could radically change the structure there and what goes on. And as a result of that, we obviously became involved with Z and related matters to that and their contribution. And I am aware that there is an element of dishonesty even in there, where men who you think should be looking after their own fellow countrymen are doing things to benefit them personally rather than their countrymen. And that's one of the issues, isn't it? So our view is that we deal with these corporations by using our financial strength to get into and provide opportunities for those who are disenfranchised in this way. And I hope that in the months to come, we can share information together so you can help us in our opportunities, and you can see what we're doing, so you can talk to your own colleagues and those who you advise as to methodology and structure. And hopefully we can then move forward together, because that's my interest in becoming involved with this discussion.
Brilliant. Leslie, we'll come back to you just in a moment. There's a discussion going on in the comments that I'd like to bring Sandile on. But Leslie, just in the meantime, we've had two questions about this this model that you put forward, which had a positive response here. But the question is twofold. Firstly, how is the funding model working at the beginning? Is this something that's offered for free, or is it something that's paid back with a sort of credit facility in the first instance? And secondly, the situation you describe with a lack of formal offtake is something that's been recognized as a need elsewhere in Uganda, in Kenya. Is the model that you're putting forward something you can see a role for being replicated and scaled in other gold markets across the African continent?
Most certainly. We put it in play, and we've been in talks with the Zambian government at cabinet level on these matters in exactly the way as I'm expressing them to you today, as we have with the Tanzanian government, and we sat across the table from them. And outwardly, they're very supportive. And we find these things, but yes, we can roll this out in other countries, and we're very interested in doing so. The limitation in all these things, from our perspective, is not money, because we've structured this, as I've said, in a way that we will make money, so we will be able to do this. And yes, we're doing it for profit, of course, but that enables us to have the funds to do these things. And eventually, for those who we work with, because that is the phrase, work with, will also benefit. And we'd be very happy to talk to people in other countries. We have had approaches from other governments, but be frank, I've been spending the last 2 years flat out putting this structure together. And so I haven't traveled to other countries. The only one I've traveled to, as I've said, in recent times was Zambia, in addition to Tanzania. But we're aware of it, and we'll be very happy to discuss rolling it out, later this year and early next year.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Leslie. Sandile, I'm going to bring you back in now. There's been a discussion rolling on in the chat box in our panel, looking at formalization. And the two questions that seem to have popped up are whether or not there is a willingness within small-scale miners and small-scale mining communities to formalize in the first place, And a follow-up question to that is, what are the benefits of doing so with perhaps a degree of opacity in how more formalized mining operations work, with monetary benefits and with profits maybe occasionally not altogether clear that where they end up. Sandile, could we ask you first just to explore the question about willingness and the political will that you see within the communities that you work with on formalizing?
In my history of the work I've done with artisanal miners, I would say on the context of the willingness of formalization with the artisanal mining sector, I would just say it's almost 99.99999. I don't know how many nines percent of artisanal miners have agreed in terms of that. They actually want to be regulated, and they do want to be formalized, though there's a huge gap and a huge issue in terms of, I think, what Leslie has been sharing in terms of the assistance from the government side. One, which looks at the issue of financing, to the issue of like your safety, and with this, part of the advantages of the formalization of artisanal mining, as I've done some interviews with the artisanal miners themselves, was that right now they are being discriminated by police, who usually do not even report their cases. Sometimes they're just being caught for the sake of taking their equipment and selling it to other groups of artisanal miners. And that shows the huge gap, which is the communication barrier between the government and the artisanal miners themselves. And the second part is the issue of being paid for the hard work you've done for that particular week or for that particular day, no matter how small your product is, because what they are getting after buying, after like when they sell their material, it's way less than what they should be getting. And the people who are in between, they are the ones who are usually benefiting from their work. So which is what makes most of them want to be formalized, because they can see the value of their work. When you look at the news, 1 ounce of gold, it's plus minus 1,800 rands in South African rands. Like when you compare if I can get that money on a daily basis, if I can get 1 ounce, which is an ounce, it's like a gram in South Africa. And if I have got 1 gram, it means I've got something like 1.8 US dollars. So when I convert that money, that amount into South African rands, how much do I have? And if you cut all the people in between me and the legal entity that would buy, or maybe like let's say your South African Reserve Bank or wherever where they are selling these precious metals and these minerals, it means the South African community can be rich. The South African country cannot be broke economically. So these are part of the benefits of the economy. Mining sector is regulated, and of which, and one of the meetings when we spoke to, where we had the government calling us to come and give in input in terms of what needs to be done, especially when you look at on the perspective of mining companies. They have they do have resources like your heavy machinery, which is left underground. There is pipelines, gas pipelines, and other electrical cables, which they usually leave underground when they close their mines, even whether they abandon them or they leave them legally. They usually leave heavy equipment underground. So which means if artisanal mining can be formalized and proper investments are allocated into artisanal, developing artisanal mining, there are so many resources which can be utilized rather than being abandoned underground by these big companies. Then artisanal miners would be able to be given skills in terms of proper trainings in terms of how to use those equipments for them to easily and safely continue with the development of artisanal mining. And it can be so beneficial to the country's economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandile. That's excellent. Dr. Janet, I'd like to bring you in on this. I think reminding our audience and panelists today that we're talking about the practical steps about enfranchising, and I think defining our terms is a good place to start when it comes to practical steps. Dr. Janet, you raised the point that part of the issue with formalizing is actually coming to an agreement on what that looks like. Perhaps you could talk through some practical steps on how we come to a more pragmatic definition of formalization in the first place.
Oh, thanks, Jerome. Apparently, the aspect of formalization is not specific only to the mining sector. I think I have to underscore this, given my area of specialization in labor. We have been having this debate around formalizing, the informal, formalizing, and of course, artisanal mining is part and parcel of that particular debate. So it's very, let me say, up to now, there's no consensus really around what formalization is. And my study, my research in the particular sector of Zamazama, I remember much of the questions that the women and men that I interacted with on those sites where the activities happen were a bit ambivalent as to whether, when you try to talk about, oh, we want this, all this recognition and so, whether they should go for it or not. Because the first question will be, will we be paying tax? But surprisingly, many of them were like keen to pay tax. I don't know, perhaps it was the specificities of that particular area. I'm sure, Comrade Sandile, we've been there many times together. So
no, they're all willing to pay tax.
Yes,
from what I know.
That's what I'm saying. Apparently, I'm saying there were those particular questions. But for me, why I'm jumping in is that tax shouldn't constitute part of the reasons that the government should pave way or decriminalize this particular sector. It goes back to what I alluded to earlier on, that is it for economic gains on the side of the government that they'll say, oh, okay, because they've agreed to pay tax, let's do away with the criminal element of it. What exactly do we mean by formalizing and decriminalizing? So for me, it shouldn't, let me just emphasize this. You could be legal, because I had Comrade Sandile, you mentioned something around those in, I think, Northern Cape, preferring a regulatory framework. I'm not quite sure whether I got it correctly, but I think I had that. So there's a difference between legalizing and formalizing. You could be legal, but in the informal economy. A woman who is selling fruits on the street is actually doing it legally, as long as they comply to the bylaws of that particular area. It's all about the bylaws. We can actually maybe get a distinction from that. But in the case of Zamazamas, there are so many aspects that criminalize them that need to be dealt with before we even jump. What are those particular aspects, which we know they're actually constructed around the issue of lack of recognition, lack of acknowledgement, like they're labeled as criminals wherever they are. You know, like in Zimbabwe, we've heard about this machete gang that they call, you know, Mashurugwi, that is criminalizing already. So for me, I guess if you are to make any interventions in the context of a country like South Africa, it would be great to begin by having a conversation, some workshops, to provide technical support, not only to government, but to civil society players and the Zamazamas themselves, so that we can begin to define what is it that constitutes formalization for you. Is it just getting that, applying for the permit that costs an exorbitant price of 30,000, then one can just go and prospect anyway? Then, yeah, so there are different components. Those are some of the aspects that we need to take forward to say, where is the starting point? Where should we begin before we have this, kind of, picture as to if the Zamazamas, yes, they're ready to pay tax, then we can say, oh, okay, they're now fine. Then we actually take a back seat in terms of our struggles. There are many struggles to this that need to be taken into account. The health and safety, does it mean that if I have that particular permit, then I go into an abandoned shaft and start mining, I'm immune from crime? What do I mean? Those abandoned shafts are private properties that are owned by big companies. So one would be liable for prosecution for trespassing laws. So we see we have different aspects to it. So it's a debate that, or a conversation that perhaps we need to also take out of this. But most fundamentally, I'm just delving and trying to push us to begin to have, as we are mapping a way forward, to say at the fore should be the police and legislative reforms to ensure that investors' resources are not wasted. Because if you are to give somebody a loan or some kind of support, even if it's for free, it's philanthropic, you would certainly need tomorrow to come back and find them in a better, improved position, isn't it right? But now we have the police. Comrade Sandile mentioned that aspect. The police confiscating whatever, perhaps you have invested some capital, then one day you're unfortunate, police come because it's a criminalized sector, they confiscate your proceeds. Then at the end of the day, you've lost everything. So those are some of the examples and nuances that we find in the context of South Africa. Unlike in Zimbabwe, I don't know, there are some dynamics, but interesting. I was so delighted to actually hear more about the Tanzanian context, which is quite interesting. Yeah, I guess it's all about delves more for me from a South African context. It's about policy reforms, support, technical support in that form. Then we are guaranteed that at the end of the day, whatever investment we actually channel towards this particular sector, they are not wasted, but harnessed for the good of not only the individuals involved, but the entire country as a whole. Yes. So the moment politicians begin to recognize and acknowledge the fundamental contribution of this particular sector, then that's the point at which we'll be actually taking this conversation seriously.
It's a very valid point. You can't invest in something which doesn't have legal standing, because all of the things you mentioned, Dr. Janet, will happen. So that's our point. So let's make the thing legal and bring everybody on board, pay taxes, have bank accounts, stand up and be counted, and then you can't be put down in the way that this is happening. You can't be taken advantage of. And the benefit of having that structure is also that the proceeds of mining are at the fullest possible value for everyone. That's why we're able to do it, because we will sell out. We have the connections to just push it straight into the London market. And so we're able to give the miners a much better price than they would normally get, but above all, enable them to develop much faster and be much more productive, because digging by hand is a very slow business, and they need to be in a situation where they know where it is and they're not taking risks. And we went to a site that we bought recently, and there were 8 men working there, and they dug a hole in the ground, which was that by then, they'd been there for 2 years, dug a hole in the ground that was about 40 feet down. And they were descending down into this hole by putting their hands and their legs against the side of the wall. They couldn't even afford to have a proper ladder down there. So they went down there and they stayed there for 5 days. And then they just hauled up the ore in baskets, and they had donkeys on the top of the hill that carried the ore down the hill. And that's how they were working. It's very, very dangerous. There's no question about it. And but if we just said to them, right, you carry on with that, because we recognized that that was their way of earning a living. But we then said, well, we'll be developing, so you'll have jobs with us, you will do this and do that and take things forward, which they were very pleased about, very happy to do. And I think that, as you say, my experience is that miners in this situation very much want to support a proper structure and to be recognized. And why shouldn't they be?
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Leslie. I'd like to look at the questions we've received in our chat box again. When we talk about enfranchisement, in this conversation, we've spoken about safety, we've spoken about financial support, we've spoken about the law. One topic we've not touched on yet is gender equality and whether or not there is an appetite and support structure in place to enable enterprising entrepreneurial women to participate in this sector as well. And Dr. Janet, I just wanted to ask if you had anything from your research or anything from the conversations you've heard over the course of this alternative mining Indaba that could speak into doing more to improve the gender parity within the mining sector.
Oh, thank you so much for that question. And I'm glad, I thought as much that I'll be the first suspect to have to respond to that question. Yeah. No, I understand. I'm happy to have it and take it head on. I was actually getting ready for that particular question when you started talking. Apparently, I'm trying to look for one of my, some of my work that I've done in the sector that actually speaks to that particular aspect. I wanted actually to demonstrate it using some, some photos just to show the gender disparities and dynamics in the sector. There's a whole range of issues, and I'm sure it will be very, let me say, there are quite a range of issues that need to be addressed in this particular aspect when it regards to gender. And the time that I have, I think it would be too limited to begin to chat about it. But basically, yes, we have issues that have been raised in the opening panel. I'm not sure if we're part and parcel of it, some of the audience. We had testimonies and some scientific study that was conducted in Zimbabwe, in which it was so clear that superstitions and culture are still major barriers to women participation in small-scale mining. And this is also attached to the aspect of, what do you call them? These particular laws that are actually not friendly to women and disenfranchise them from having access to land. So all those particular dynamics are at play. The small-scale mining sector, while in the context of South Africa, the disparities are quite nuanced and subtle. Like, for instance, in the artisanal mining of, what do you call it? Diamond, there is kind of some parity because people are not going underground, but still all those cultural norms are still very much prominent, whereby women, you know, it begins with the gender division of labor. It also goes to, you know, some kind of stigmatization or stereotyping or labeling. And we heard from the testimony from one of the presenters from Zimbabwe again, with a young a female small scale miner, where she indicated that her just being in the sector constitute to all these name calling, labeling theories like prostitutes. Once you are found, I remember, I don't know if people have had access to some of the work that I've written. The first time I was at the site where I conducted my study on the sector ASM, the first time I went there, I was just dressed up like an ordinary any other student. The next thing, this woman came and actually reprimanded me and said, you shouldn't come into our spaces dressed up like this because our men are here. So basically, I was already, you know, labeled as one of those. She's not coming for research, but she's coming for marketing, you know. So those are some of the dynamics. Even, you know, there are so many interesting aspects to the gender aspects, and we don't need to be hypocritical about it or silent about it. We're not going to be muted and pretend as if everything is at par. While the sector itself has got various challenges, but of course, women's challenges are further exacerbated by those gender divides in such a way that sometimes we don't seem to have common voice, common ground to perhaps further the struggles, which is why sometimes certain struggles begin to say, let's do away with all this criminalization. But at a point when you're not getting into the struggle terrain with a united voice, with common problems, but also identifying the particular problems that are specific to certain groups, then divisions are more likely to actually come up, which is why sometimes we see all this ambivalence. We have the government taking some proactive step at some point, then they take a sit back because of all those particular divisions around gender. So we certainly need to do away with this. Hence, we called in our first opening, we are actually calling for a nuanced feminist responsive approach to not only them in the mining sector, but across all sectors.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Janet.
May I just comment that we, just as a matter of interest, we have African ladies on our board of directors, and we have African ladies running the processing, 2 of the processing plants for gold. So I fully support what you're saying, Janet.
Thank you very much, Leslie. At least whatever we have to understand that whatever we do, as long as it's inclusive, then you know, it takes into account those marginalized in our communities, and those who are historically disadvantaged, then that's another key point aspect that we need to take into account. That's a practical issue that we need to really take into account so that we can actually be in a position to implement whatever we believe should be happening. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Janet. Well, we are very much nearly at the top of the hour here, and that seems like a good place as any to draw this fascinating and very engaging panel to a close. I would like to thank our panelists for their time this afternoon and for the discussion that we've shared over.
Oh, sorry, Leslie. Sorry, Jerome. I thought I was gonna get. Sorry, let me just quickly. I forgot this point that I thought I should emphasize. The gender. It's gendered. I mean, the issue of collateral to access finances. It also came up, I think, prominently in sessions that have been running. I guess the interventions from Leslie's side would actually assist, and also part of this conversation, we should begin to think about how best can we support women who do not own land, who do not own properties, to ensure that we have everybody being able to be economically empowered in this particular sector. Because from my own study, it was very clear that women have to do the most menial tasks, but laborious. I mean, menial in the sense that they are lowly paid, the income, like the least that they could actually, you know, the lowest, like 300 or whatever. But you'd find that the miner who goes underground can make as many thousands or millions, or not millions, I'm exaggerating. But yeah, so those particular dynamics, collateral, financing aspect of it, it's very, very important. So if you could actually prioritize more women cooperatives, because it also speaks to associations. I guess if we begin to do it from a socialist way of mining against this capitalist model, and ensure that we bring everybody on board, so that all those barriers like permits, which costs exorbitant prices, 30,000, when somebody perhaps like women, they're just getting perhaps something for the day, you know, it's hand to mouth. So they can't have that opportunity to accumulate as much capital to such an extent that they can come up with the 30,000 and go and apply for a permit. So that's the kind of support now beyond the policy and legislative reforms. Thank you. That agendaed.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much again for that final point, Dr. Janet. I think we are going to bring things to a close now, but this webinar will be available for streaming on the Alternative Mining Indaba online profiles and on Facebook Live as well. And if you do have any further questions about the topics discussed, or if you wish to contact any of the panelists, I would suggest using the email address for the AMI, which is alternativeminingindaba@gmail.com. Thank you so much again to everyone for following this online and on Facebook Live, and to our panelists, Dr. Janet, to Leslie, to Sandile, and Dr. Yassir from Sudan sends his apologies. I think maybe they require some investment in their telecom sector as much as in their mining sector, but that's a discussion for another day. Thank you very much again to everybody for joining us.
Jerome, can I have a quick comment in terms of the issue of gender within the ASM?
Yes,
I think there's one point which I want to quickly raise as a matter of concern within this discussion of gender sensitivity and artisanal mining. In the work I've done along the years, I think there's a huge gap between us, the civil society, and women artisanal miners. For in most cases, we relate the story of artisanal mine sites as dangerous areas. So most women are afraid to go to those sites. And the women we find there in most cases as male from the civil society is that sometimes it's difficult for us to sit down and discuss women issues with women as men. So what my plea is, can we have more NGOs who want to engage female activists who will engage with the women artisanal miners? Because in most cases, they feel as if they're isolated, because as men, we can't discuss their issues and they can't be open to us with their own issues of which are happening within the sites. And there is a lot that if they can speak women to women, that they can be able to outload for us to be able to understand what is their perspective as women artisanal miners. That's the plea I have with the civil society, not only in South Africa, but across the world. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I thought perhaps since we still have 4 minutes, I could show some of the photos, pertaining to division of labor and the working conditions that are gendered. You can actually see that, which you can see. I remember when I showed this photo to some audience at some point, they were like, "How is that flour?" I said, "No, it's not flour. Flour for making bread." I said, "That stone that has been crushed." So you can imagine the amount of work the amount of labor that's invested into grinding the stone to such an extent that it can be taken to, for purification. Yet these people, these women, I don't know why it's not showing. They actually they get the least from out of that particular labor. And you can actually see that they have children at their back. Those are some of the gender dynamics in the sector that need to be addressed. Leslie, these, just bear in mind, as part of the interventions, would certainly need some child-friendly workplaces. I don't know, in the mainstream economy, we've been calling for, I know unions and other civil society players have been calling for childcare facilities at workplaces. So I'm not sure in the context of Tanzania, perhaps we can have a discussion separately. How do women who participate in the very same sector, straddle between social reproductive roles in the homes? I guess you can see the babies, it's part of the social reproductive roles, and the productive roles that is coming to work and generate an income for the family. So thank you for the participant who raised the aspect of gender. Like I said, I would actually need a day to talk more about this. It's so passionate about to my heart, and I'm glad that Jerome actually posed it to me, and we can have some other conversation. Perhaps that's what we should maybe take forward as part of the next conversation in the next alternative mining Indaba. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, and we'll certainly feed it back to the organizers. And perhaps we don't even have to wait until next year to have it. Maybe we can do something as a standalone event. But I think as we've just got 1 minute left, if I could just extend my thanks again to all of our panelists for taking the time to share your thoughts with us this afternoon. And to Riska and Brian for arranging this afternoon's panel. I just want to say again that if there are any questions, please direct them by email to alternativeminingindaba@gmail.com, and we'll make sure that they get to the right place. And if I could ask Brian to bring things to a close now, that would be wonderful. So thank you to everybody again, and good luck with everything for the rest of the event.